Lucky Grandma opens with a fortune. This little movie, like many independent films of its type, went largely unnoticed on release. This was only worsened by the fact that it was distributed to virtual theaters during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. But God, if it didn't hold my attention. Lucky Grandma follows a character referred to only as Grandma Wong, a widowed grandmother living in Manhattan's Chinatown neighborhood. She was played by Tsai Chin, one of the greats when it comes to Chinese actresses in the Anglosphere, and she was 83 years old at the time of the movie's filming. We don't often get movies about old women, and even less often are they Asian American. But there really couldn't have been a better choice of subject for the delivery of this movie's core message. Lucky Grandma, unsurprisingly, is a movie about luck. It almost is surprising how little importance the second part of the title ends up having in comparison. Grandma Wong's family plays an important role, but the majority of the movie takes place without them present. Her family is of course very important to her, but they're far from her central or driving motivation. She's given agency and individuality, and many of her actions only affect her own life rather than her family's. This kind of independence is immediately something we don't see often when it comes to Asian women in film, let alone elderly ones. Even one of Chin's earliest notable film roles, the first ever Chinese Bond girl, served basically no purpose other than to sleep with Sean Connery. But Grandma Wong breaks this mold. She's self-sufficient, driven, and she has a strong sense of motivation. The idea of her luck, or lack thereof, it influences every decision she makes throughout the course of the movie. As I stated, the movie begins with Grandma Wong receiving a fortune. She's given a reading of good luck soon after the death of her lifelong husband. Chinese traditional and spiritual practices have a strong, consistent presence throughout the film, and it's for an important reason. Besides Grandma Wong's belief in divination, she's a firm believer in traditional medicine. She immediately listens to a prescription for her feng shui to improve her luck. She does Tai Chi every morning. She takes care of an altar for her late husband, and she's shown to be a Buddhist who is careful about deistic respect. The film treats her spirituality with care. It doesn't make any assertion that her beliefs are correct, and in fact there are moments that may suggest the opposite. But it doesn't belittle her or treat her as ridiculous for having them either. These beliefs put her at odds with the rest of her family, especially her son Howard, who wants her to live with him and her grandchildren. This emotional conflict between Grandma Wong and her son marks the character journey she undergoes throughout the course of the film. While Grandma Wong is busy escaping thugs, having a tense negotiation with a gang for a bodyguard, and ending up in the middle of high-stakes shootouts, she at the same time is battling her own need to retain her identity and refuse changes to the way she lives her life. Independence versus dependence, spirituality versus pragmatic realism, first generation versus second generation. The conflict between Grandma Wong and her son can easily be read to represent two broader sides of the Asian American coin. Grandma Wong's life, in her small apartment tucked away between two restaurants in Chinatown, unwaveringly devoted to traditional practices, represents a pushback against assimilation, a need to be Chinese before she's American. From her perspective, Howard represents everything she doesn't want to be. Living with him would mean giving up, an admission that she isn't good enough on her own, that she can't continue to live her life the way she always has. This is why she's so driven by the concept of her own luck. Grandma Wong is holding on to this idea that the good luck she so desperately needs is right around the corner, right on the date her fortune teller told her it would be. She takes all of her savings to the casino, experiencing a high as she wins repeatedly, only for it to crash dramatically as she loses everything. It's on the bus ride home that a man from a criminal gang passes away in his sleep right next to her, leaving behind a sack full of more cash than she's ever seen in her life. This is the good luck she's been looking for the whole time, and I think the selection of this theme was very deliberate for the film's setting and cast, as it reflects a deeply Asian American reality. Immigration, especially when it comes to people of color to America, is all about luck. There are Asian Americans who will find success, assimilate into whiteness the best they can, and live comfortable middle-class lives. These are the lucky ones. Then there are the unlucky Asian Americans, the ones who have difficulty finding steady work, who live on the edge in a cycle of poverty, the ones who have something go wrong and their lives are suddenly flipped upside down.
辛辛苦苦，天天从早到晚没有休息。我信任他，后来他走了，发现在银行里什么都没有，怎么能什么都没有？总应该留下点什么。
The ones who are left behind. The story of an elderly Asian American woman combating the hardships of immigration, poverty, aging, and assimilation seems like it would lend itself to a slow, personal, no-nonsense drama, kind of like The Joy Luck Club, another movie Tsai Chin is well known for. But despite its profound moments, Lucky Grandma isn't that. Actually, it can be kind of ridiculous.
What the fuck?
Hi, Nomi.
The movie's very concept of a grumpy grandmother that ends up owing hundreds of thousands to a criminal underworld is kind of absurd, and I think that's the point. The concept of luck is pretty inextricable from comedy. Misfortune is, well, it's funny, or at least it can be. So many of the classics of comedy come back to that same concept, whether it's a cartoon character stepping on a rake or a sitcom in which a character becomes victim to a situation so unfortunate that it's downright absurd.
$2, but everyone in front of me got free bread.
You want bread?
Yes, please.
$3! What? No soup for you!
Lucky Grandma uses its comedic moments to do a number of things. It draws attention to Grandma Wong's misfortune while also breaking the tension of it. Like at the beginning of the film when she lights incense at her husband's altar before having a judgy back and forth stare down with it. The absurdity of the film's pitch itself reflects back on the absurdity of the hardship she faces. The comedy keeps the film light, suspending your disbelief a little, something that's a little bit necessary when you get to the almost comical action scenes. The first half of the movie leaves you with a high, just like the one Grandma Wong feels in the casino. Good luck, absurd jokes, shopping sprees, and entertaining action. It leaves you smiling along as you watch, immersed in its absurdity. But then, just like all highs, you crash, and the film leaves you quietly staring at reality. Lucky Grandma can be a bit of an absurd movie at times, but in between then, it weaves in these moments that just feel so grounded. Very quickly and very suddenly, the veil shatters. Grandma Wong stops being a badass chain-smoking grandma outsmarting criminal gangs. Instead, you see her for what she is, a desperate elderly woman in poverty, fearful of losing her independence, who's only looking for enough luck to survive. The film is really good at leaving you with the distinct feeling that Grandma Wong should never have had to experience any of this. And just like with the comedy, I think that's the point. Misfortune can be funny, yeah, but it can also be traumatic and sad and horrifying too. It's an often spread quote that comedy is equal to tragedy plus time. Another variation says that all comedy is tragedy when you look into it. I get the meaning behind these quotes, but I'm not sure that I exactly agree. I don't think the tragedy is comedy, whether time has passed or not. We as humans want to laugh. We want to be cheered up with comedy, but we never want there to be a tragedy to come around and fuel it. At least most normal people don't. Instead, I think we use comedy because of tragedy, in response to it. Often the easiest way to deal with your own misfortune is to laugh it off, to just see it for as stupid as it really is. Whether it be other people's bigotry or economic struggles or COVID, in a world that feels like it makes no sense, laughing can be your only option. We use comedy to find ways to be happy, no matter how unlucky the cards we're dealt are. Before I end this video, there's one more thing I need to talk about. I've tried to avoid spoilers for specific plot points in the second half as much as I can because I want you to go and watch this movie for yourself. It's criminally underrated, and you might get a different interpretation out of the film than I could, especially if you're Asian American. But I think it's necessary to talk about the ending for a moment, so you don't get the wrong idea about the message this film sends. Earlier, I positioned Grandma Wong and her son as almost being two sides of the Asian American identity, one that's Asian and one that's American. When the film ends with Grandma Wong being more receptive to the idea of living with Howard, you can get the idea that the movie is suggesting that assimilation and Americanization is the goal. However, this is more about how I interpret Grandma Wong's perspective of her life and her own independence versus her son's suggestion of living with him. Grandma Wong doesn't want to feel dependent on her son. She wants to continue living her life the way she always has. Howard doesn't represent whiteness or Americanness as much as he represents change, and that's something a still grieving Grandma Wong wasn't ready to face at the beginning of the film. The end of the film shows Grandma Wong with a much different attitude around her family than she had at the start, although she's still a little wary about the idea of living with Howard. But the film ends in what Howard wants to become her room. He set up an altar for her, even if she chastises him for putting it in the bedroom. And the two sit on a windowsill and just talk. Howard goes from speaking English to Mandarin with her, and he shares one of her cigarettes with a laugh. Grandma Wong is closer with Howard because her perspective is shifted by the end of the film. Howard no longer represents helplessness and unwanted change. Suddenly the person he is and the life he lives doesn't seem so far from her. This is because, of course, there is no real way to be an Asian American that is either Asian or American. As Grandma Wong begins to see what she and her son share rather than what sets them apart, she's finally more receptive of him and how he wants to care for her. This film begins with an unlucky old woman getting a fortune of good luck. Whether that luck is money or her own family, it's impossible to actually quantify, but it uses that concept of luck to fuel its comedy that highlights and enhances the tragedy at its core. It tells a story about the reality of being Asian American that's as profound as it is funny, in a way that only a film like Lucky Grandma could manage.